Welcome, and settle in comfortably as we embark on a journey back through the centuries to ancient Rome. Tonight, we'll explore a side of Roman civilization that your history textbooks likely glossed over: the intoxicating world of religious festivals where wine flowed like rivers, social conventions dissolved like morning mist, and ordinary citizens believed they could speak directly with the gods themselves. Imagine, if you will, closing your eyes and drifting back nearly 2,000 years to a time when the boundaries between the sacred and profane were as fluid as the wine that filled countless cups during Rome's most notorious celebrations. These weren't the stately, dignified ceremonies you might picture when thinking of ancient religion. Instead, they were raw, sensual, and deeply human experiences that revealed both the heights of spiritual ecstasy and the depths of physical endurance that Romans were willing to embrace in their quest for divine connection. As you listen tonight, picture the narrow cobblestone streets of the Eternal City, thick with the scent of burning incense and spilled wine, echoing with the sounds of drums and ecstatic cries. Feel the Mediterranean sun beating down on crowds of revelers who had abandoned not just their clothes, but their everyday identities in pursuit of something transcendent. These festivals were not mere entertainment. They were believed to be essential for the survival of Rome itself, sacred obligations that required participants to push their bodies and minds to the very limits of human endurance. A night's journey will take us through 4 distinct but interconnected stories from this fascinating world. We'll experience the brutal realities of festival participation through the eyes of an ordinary Roman citizen. Witness how these celebrations could destroy even the most powerful political families. Uncover the mysterious rituals of Rome's most secret religious society. And finally, contrast these experiences with the luxurious life of those who stood at the pinnacle of Roman religious hierarchy. Make yourself comfortable. Let the gentle rhythm of this exploration wash over you, and prepare to discover how the Romans got drunk, naked, and convinced themselves they could speak with the gods. You wake before dawn in a cramped Roman apartment, your head already pounding from the cheap wine you drank yesterday to prepare for today's Bacchanalia festival. The wooden floors creak under your feet as you stumble toward the small shrine in the corner of your one-room dwelling, where a crude statue of Bacchus leers at you through the dim light filtering through the single window. Your stomach churns, not from nervousness, but from the rancid olive oil you consumed last night, mixed with the fermented fish sauce that passes for seasoning in your meager diet. The streets outside are already alive with the sounds of preparation. You can hear the bleating of goats being led to slaughter, the rhythmic pounding of drums echoing off the stone walls of nearby buildings, and the raucous laughter of early participants who have clearly already begun their libations. The air is thick with the smoke of burning incense mixed with the less pleasant odors of human waste, rotting vegetables, and the metallic scent of blood from the animal sacrifices that have already begun. You dress in your cleanest tunic, which isn't saying much, as it still bears the stains of last week's festival and carries the persistent odor of sweat and wine that no amount of washing in the public fountains can fully remove. Your sandals are worn thin from countless walks across the unforgiving Roman cobblestones, and you know that by the end of today's festivities, your feet will be bloody and raw. The leather straps cut into your ankles, a familiar discomfort that you've learned to ignore, just as you've learned to ignore so many other small miseries that define daily life in the sprawling city. As you step into the street, you're immediately assaulted by the sensory overload that is a Roman festival day. The narrow alleyways between the towering insulae are packed with bodies, unwashed, wine-soaked, and increasingly frenzied. The crowd pushes and shoves, and you're pressed against strangers whose breath reeks of garlic and whose bodies exude the sharp smell of fear, excitement, and alcohol. A woman next to you vomits suddenly, the bile splattering across your feet and mixing with the already treacherous combination of mud, urine, and spilled wine that coats the streets like a slippery carpet of human excess. The procession to the sacred grove begins, and you find yourself swept along in a river of humanity that shows no mercy for the weak, the old, or the hesitant. Children cry as they're separated from their parents in the crush, their small voices lost in the cacophony of shouting, singing, and the ever-present sound of drums. An elderly man falls just ahead of you, and you watch in horror as the crowd simply steps over and around him, too caught up in their religious fervor to stop. You try to help him, extending your hand toward his weathered face, but the press of bodies carries you forward relentlessly, and you lose sight of him in the chaos, left to wonder if he'll survive the day. The heat is oppressive. Rome in summer is a furnace at the best of times, and the combination of packed bodies, burning torches, and the blazing sun creates an almost unbearable environment. Sweat pours down your face, stinging your eyes and making your tunic cling uncomfortably to your skin like a damp shroud. The salt from your perspiration mixes with the dust kicked up by thousands of feet, creating a paste that coats your throat and makes breathing difficult. You're desperately thirsty, but the only available drink is more wine. Strong, unwatered wine that burns your throat and makes your head spin even more violently. When you finally reach the sacred grove, you're confronted with scenes that would shock you if you weren't already half drunk and delirious from heat exhaustion. Men and women are stripping off their clothes with abandon, their bodies glistening with sweat and wine, pale skin flushed red from the sun and alcohol. The air is filled with the sounds of ecstatic screaming, frenzied dancing, and activities that, in any other context, would be considered deeply inappropriate. You realize with growing horror that participation isn't optional. To hold back, to show restraint, is to mark yourself as impious, potentially subject to the wrath of both the gods and your fellow celebrants. The social pressure is immense and inescapable. Eyes watch you from every direction, judging your level of devotion, measuring your commitment to the sacred celebration. Those who hesitate, who show reluctance to join in the increasingly wild behavior, are quickly identified and either pressured to participate or shunned as unworthy of the god's favor. You feel the weight of expectation pressing down on you like a physical force, demanding that you abandon not just your clothes but your inhibitions, your sense of personal dignity, your very identity as a rational human being. The wine keeps flowing, but it's not the refined vintages enjoyed by the wealthy. This is rough, harsh wine mixed with honey and spices that create a psychoactive brew designed to induce visions and religious ecstasy. With each cup, your ability to think clearly diminishes, and you find yourself doing things you would never consider in your normal state of mind. You dance until your muscles scream in protest. You scream until your voice becomes a hoarse whisper, and you engage in rituals that leave you feeling both spiritually elevated and physically debased. The transformation is gradual but inexorable. What begins as reluctant participation slowly becomes eager involvement as the combination of alcohol, peer pressure, and religious fervor breaks down your normal psychological defenses. You find yourself speaking in tongues, uttering sounds that seem to come from somewhere deep within your chest. Words in no language you recognize, but which feel pregnant with meaning. Your body moves of its own accord, writhing and spinning in patterns that seem both ancient and spontaneous. The sacrifice of animals is a brutal affair that marks the festival's transition into its most intense phase. You watch as priests, their hands slick with blood, slice open the throats of goats, sheep, and bulls with practiced efficiency. The animals' death throes are violent and disturbing, their legs kicking frantically as life ebbs away, their blood spraying across the altar and the nearby participants in crimson arcs that catch the sunlight. You're expected to drink some of this blood, mixed with wine, as part of the communion with the gods. The taste is metallic and nauseating, coating your tongue with a flavor that seems to penetrate your very soul. But to refuse would be to invite divine punishment and social ostracism. As the day wears on, the boundaries between the sacred and the profane become increasingly blurred. What began as religious observance devolves into something that resembles organized chaos, a carnival of the flesh that pushes every participant to their physical and psychological limits. People are engaging in intimate acts in full view of the crowd, convinced that they're channeling the fertility powers of the gods, their inhibitions dissolved in wine and religious ecstasy. Others are speaking in tongues, claiming to receive direct messages from Bacchus or other deities, their faces contorted with expressions of rapture and madness. The more skeptical part of your mind recognizes that this is likely the result of alcohol and group hysteria, but that rational voice is increasingly drowned out by the intoxicating atmosphere of the festival. Logic and reason seem like foreign concepts in this environment where emotion and sensation reign supreme. You begin to doubt your own perceptions, wondering if the visions you're seeing and the voices you're hearing might actually be divine communications rather than the products of an addled mind. The sun beats down mercilessly, and you realize you haven't eaten anything substantial since yesterday. The combination of alcohol, heat, and physical exertion is taking its toll on your body in ways you hadn't anticipated. You feel dizzy and nauseated, your vision swimming in and out of focus, but there's nowhere to rest, nowhere to escape the relentless pace of the celebration. The festival ground offers no shade, no respite from the brutal Mediterranean sun that seems to burn with special intensity on this sacred day. Other participants are beginning to collapse from exhaustion, dehydration, and alcohol poisoning. You see them falling like leaves in autumn, their bodies finally surrendering to the punishment they've endured. Some are carried away by friends or family members who have retained enough presence of mind to recognize the signs of distress, but others are simply left where they fall, their fate left to the gods they came to honor. The sight of these casualties serves as a grim reminder of the festival's dangerous nature, yet somehow it only seems to intensify the fervor of those still standing. The music is deafening, drums, flutes, and cymbals creating a cacophonous sound that seems designed to drive participants into even greater states of frenzy. The rhythm is hypnotic and relentless, pounding in your chest like a second heartbeat, drowning out your own thoughts and replacing them with the collective pulse of the celebration. Your ears are ringing, and you can barely hear your own thoughts above the din. The combination of sensory overload and chemical impairment creates a dreamlike state where reality becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish from hallucination. The priests move through the crowd like shepherds tending their flock, encouraging greater participation, distributing more wine, and leading increasingly frenzied chants and dances. Their faces are painted with sacred symbols, their bodies anointed with oils and blood, and their voices hoarse from hours of continuous ritual performance. They seem to exist in a different reality from the ordinary participants, elevated by their sacred role, but also consumed by the same divine madness that affects everyone present. As evening approaches, you realize that the festival is far from over. These celebrations can last for days, and participants are expected to maintain their level of devotion throughout the entire duration. Your body is already pushed to its limits, every muscle aching, your throat raw from screaming, your skin burned by the sun and chafed by constant movement. But to leave early would be seen as a sign of weakness or impiety, a betrayal of the gods and the community that could have social and economic consequences lasting far beyond the festival itself. The night brings new challenges and new horrors. Torches are lit throughout the grove, casting dancing shadows that make the already surreal scene even more nightmarish. The cooler air provides some relief from the oppressive heat, but it also makes you more aware of your body's condition. The cuts and bruises accumulated throughout the day, the dehydration that makes your head pound, the exhaustion that weighs on your limbs like chains. You're trapped in a cycle of excess that shows no signs of abating. Each time you think you've reached your limit, the crowd's energy pulls you back into the maelstrom of celebration. The wine continues to flow, the music continues to pound, and the pressure to participate continues to mount. You find yourself engaging in behaviors that will horrify you when sobriety returns, but in the moment, they seem not just acceptable but necessary, required by the sacred nature of the occasion. The aftermath of such festivals was often as brutal as the celebrations themselves. Participants would wake up with severe hangovers that lasted for days, injuries from the frenzied dancing and activities that required medical attention, and often with little memory of what they had done during the heights of their religious ecstasy. The physical recovery could take weeks, but the psychological recovery sometimes took much longer. Some would find themselves facing social consequences for behavior that seemed acceptable in the heat of religious fervor but appeared scandalous in the cold light of day. Marriages were strained or broken by infidelities committed during the festival. Business relationships were damaged by inappropriate conduct, and social standing was compromised by actions that violated normal Roman standards of dignity and propriety. Others would discover they had made commitments or agreements while intoxicated that they were now obligated to honor. Religious vows spoken in the throes of ecstasy were considered binding. Financial pledges made to the gods had to be fulfilled, and promises of service or sacrifice could not be easily dismissed. The festival's temporary suspension of normal social rules did not extend to its aftermath, where all debts, physical, social, and spiritual, came due. The physical toll of these festivals was enormous and long-lasting. Dehydration, alcohol poisoning, injuries from falls and collisions, and exhaustion were common outcomes that could affect participants for months afterward. Many suffered from what we would now recognize as alcohol-related liver damage, kidney problems from dehydration, and joint injuries from the violent dancing and physical activities. The lack of medical knowledge and proper treatment meant that these conditions often became chronic problems that affected quality of life permanently. The psychological impact could be equally severe, as participants struggled to reconcile their normal lives with the extreme behaviors they had engaged in during the festivals. For many, these events represented a form of temporary madness that was both terrifying and addictive. The intensity of the experience, the sense of direct connection with the divine, and the complete abandonment of normal constraints created memories that could haunt participants for years afterward. Yet despite all these hardships, Romans continued to participate in these festivals because they believed deeply in their religious significance. The suffering, the excess, and the abandon were all seen as necessary components of proper worship, ways of demonstrating complete devotion to the gods and achieving a state of spiritual transcendence that was impossible in ordinary life. The festivals served as a release valve for the pressures of Roman society, allowing people to express emotions and desires that had to be suppressed in daily life. The religious and social functions of these celebrations were considered so important that abstention was viewed with suspicion. Those who refused to participate were often ostracized by their communities, excluded from business opportunities, and denied access to social networks that were essential for survival in Roman society. The festivals were not optional entertainment, but mandatory expressions of civic and religious duty, obligations that every Roman was expected to fulfill regardless of personal inclination or physical capability. In this harsh reality of Roman religious life, survival depended not just on physical endurance, but on the ability to surrender completely to the collective madness, to lose oneself so thoroughly in the experience that individual consciousness dissolved into the greater whole of community celebration. Those who held back, who tried to maintain their sense of self and dignity, often found themselves crushed by the relentless pressure of peer expectation and divine requirement. The morning after would always come, bringing with it the return of normal consciousness and the full weight of what had been endured and witnessed. But by then, you would already be counting the days until the next festival, drawn back by a mixture of religious obligation, social pressure, and the addictive memory of that brief moment when you believed you had touched the divine. As we transition from the brutal experiences of common festival participants to the corridors of Roman power, we encounter a different, but equally compelling story of how these sacred celebrations could shape individual destinies. The year was 91 BCE, and the summer heat hung over Rome like a heavy blanket, stifling the already tense political atmosphere that had been building for months. In the sweltering heat of that Roman summer, Marcus Livius Drusus the Younger stood at the threshold of his family's ancestral home, watching as preparations for the upcoming Floralia festival transformed his familiar world into something unrecognizable. As a tribune of the plebs and scion of one of Rome's most distinguished families, Drusus had always understood the importance of religious observance, but this year's festival would prove to be the catalyst for a series of events that would ultimately destroy everything he held dear. The morning air carried the scent of garlands being woven for the celebration, mixed with the aromatic smoke from countless household shrines where Romans were making their private preparations for the public festivities to come. From his elevated position on the Palatine Hill, Drusus could see the entire city spreading out below him, a vast tapestry of red tile roofs and narrow streets that would soon be filled with revelers celebrating Flora, the goddess of flowers and fertility. The Floralia, dedicated to the goddess Flora, was known for its particularly licentious character, but 91 BC, it marked a year when political tensions in Rome had reached a breaking point. Drusus had spent months attempting to pass legislation that would grant citizenship to Rome's Italian allies, a cause that had made him powerful enemies among the conservative nobility while earning him the dangerous devotion of the masses. His house had become a fortress, surrounded by supporters who saw him as their champion and enemies who viewed him as a threat to the established order. The irony of his situation was not lost on him. The same populist appeal that made him beloved by the common people also made him a target for those who feared change. His proposals for land redistribution and citizenship extension threatened the carefully maintained balance of power that had kept Rome's elite in control for generations. Now, as the festival approached, he could sense the undercurrents of conspiracy swirling around him like the eddies of the Tiber River. The festival began, as always, with the formal processions and sacrifices, ceremonies that followed patterns established centuries earlier when Rome was still a small city-state rather than the master of the Mediterranean world. But Drusus noticed immediately that something was different this year. The crowds were larger, more volatile, and the undercurrent of political tension was palpable even among the wine-soaked revelers. Citizens who would normally greet him with respectful deference now watched him with calculating eyes, their expressions impossible to read beneath their festival masks and flower crowns. His wife, Servia, had begged him not to participate publicly this year, warning that his enemies might use the chaos of the festival to strike against him. She was a woman of sharp intelligence and political acumen, qualities that had made her an invaluable advisor throughout his career. Her concerns were not born of feminine timidity, but of careful observation of the political climate that surrounded them. She had noticed the subtle changes in behavior among their social circle, the way conversations stopped when Drusus entered a room, the reluctance of former allies to be seen too closely associated with his cause. But Drusus, ever conscious of his public image and the expectations placed upon him as a magistrate, felt he had no choice but to maintain his visible support of traditional Roman religious practices. To absent himself from the Floralia would be seen as either cowardice or impiety, both of which would be fatal to his political aspirations. The Roman people expected their leaders to share in their celebrations and their hardships, to demonstrate their commitment to the gods who protected the state. As the celebration moved from the formal ceremonies to the more notorious aspects of the Floralia, the theatrical performances where actors performed nude, the public displays of sexuality, and the general abandonment of social norms, Drusus found himself caught between his personal discomfort and his political obligations. The festival had always served as a pressure release valve for Roman society, allowing the lower classes to temporarily invert the social hierarchy and engage in behaviors that would be unthinkable during ordinary times. But this year, those inversions felt less like harmless revelry and more like a preview of revolution. The theatrical performances were particularly unsettling. Traditionally, these had been bawdy but relatively innocent entertainments, comedic plays that allowed audiences to laugh at the foibles of gods and mortals alike. This year, however, the performances seemed to carry pointed political messages. Actors delivered lines that could be interpreted as commentary on current events, and the audiences responded with enthusiasm that felt dangerous and unpredictable. The turning point came on the third day of the festival, when a group of his political opponents, led by the consul Lucius Marcius Philippus, decided to use the chaos of the celebrations to orchestrate Drusus's downfall. They had been carefully observing his movements throughout the festival, noting his interactions, recording his associations, and waiting for the right moment to strike. The Floralia provided perfect cover for their machinations, a time when normal legal protections were suspended and accusations could spread like wildfire through the intoxicated crowds. During the height of the festivities, when the streets were filled with intoxicated revelers and normal law and order had temporarily dissolved, Philippus and his allies began spreading rumors that Drusus was using the sacred festival as a cover for treasonous meetings with Italian allies. The accusations were whispered in taverns, repeated in bathhouses, and discussed in the private dining rooms where Rome's elite gathered to watch the public celebrations from a safe distance. The accusation was both clever and devastating. By linking his legitimate political activities to the sacred festival, his enemies were able to cast his citizenship legislation as not just politically dangerous, but religiously impious. In the fevered atmosphere of the Floralia, where the boundaries between the sacred and profane were already blurred, such accusations carried particular weight. The same crowds that had been celebrating Drusus as their champion began to murmur with suspicion and doubt. The speed with which public opinion could shift during these festivals was one of their most dangerous characteristics. The combination of alcohol, religious fervor, and mob psychology could transform a cheering crowd into an angry mob within minutes. Drusus watched with growing alarm as the expressions of the people around him changed from adoration to suspicion to barely concealed hostility. Drusus's attempts to defend himself were hampered by the very nature of the festival he was trying to honor. The traditional speeches and formal procedures of Roman politics seemed absurdly out of place amid the revelry and chaos of the Floralia. When he tried to address the crowds directly, his words were drowned out by the music, dancing, and general mayhem that characterized the celebration. The dignified rhetoric that served him well in the Senate was ineffective against the raw emotionalism of the festival atmosphere. When he attempted to use the formal channels of government to counter the accusations, he found that most officials were either too intoxicated to function effectively or had deliberately made themselves unavailable until the festival ended. The normal machinery of Roman administration ground to a halt during major religious celebrations, leaving those under attack with few options for immediate response. Meanwhile, the festival continued around him with increasing intensity, oblivious to the political drama playing out in its midst. The combination of religious fervor, political tension, and massive quantities of wine created an explosive atmosphere where rumors could become accepted facts within hours. Fights broke out regularly between supporters of different political factions, and the normal protections afforded to magistrates began to break down as the distinction between public and private, sacred and political, dissolved in the alcoholic haze of celebration. Drusus found himself increasingly isolated, surrounded by a dwindling number of loyal supporters, while facing growing hostility from crowds that had once cheered his name. The political coalition he had built over months of careful negotiation was crumbling before his eyes, its members either fleeing to protect themselves or actively joining his opponents in hopes of saving their own positions. The most disturbing aspect of his situation was how quickly former friends and allies abandoned him. Men who had shared his table, who had pledged their support for his legislation, who had seemed committed to his cause, suddenly became unavailable or openly hostile. The festival atmosphere seemed to strip away the veneer of civilization, revealing the raw calculations of political survival that lay beneath the surface of Roman society. The climax came when a group of masked revelers, whether genuinely intoxicated festival-goers or political agents in disguise was never determined, stormed into his house during a family dinner. The invasion began as what might have been a traditional festival prank, the kind of boundary-crossing behavior that was tolerated during the Floralia. But it quickly escalated into something far more sinister. In the ensuing chaos, several members of his household were injured, valuable family artifacts were destroyed, and Drusus himself barely escaped with his life. His elderly father-in-law was knocked down and trampled, suffering injuries that would plague him for the rest of his days. Ancient family treasures, heirlooms that had been passed down through generations of distinguished service to the Roman state, were smashed or stolen by the mob. The violation of his home, the sacred space of the Roman family, represented a crossing of lines that even the permissive atmosphere of the Floralia couldn't excuse. Roman law and custom held the household sacred, a private realm that was supposed to be inviolate regardless of political disputes. The attack on his home was not just a personal assault, but a fundamental violation of Roman values. Yet the festival atmosphere made it impossible to pursue immediate justice. But the damage was done, and its effects would ripple outward like waves from a stone thrown into still water. The events of the festival had irreparably damaged Drusus's political standing and marked him as a target for his enemies. The violation of his home became a symbol of his inability to protect even his own family, calling into question his fitness to lead the Roman people. In the weeks that followed, as Rome attempted to return to normalcy after the excesses of the Floralia, Drusus found himself facing not just political opposition, but active hostility from former allies who now viewed him as a liability. The sacred festival that was supposed to renew and purify Roman society had instead become the instrument of his destruction. The psychological toll on his family was immense. His wife Servia, who had tried to warn him of the dangers, now lived in constant fear for their safety. Their children, who had grown up expecting to inherit positions of influence and respect, found themselves social pariahs. The household slaves, once proud to serve a distinguished family, began to worry about their own futures as their masters' fortunes declined. The irony was not lost on Drusus that a celebration dedicated to Flora, the goddess of renewal and flowering, had instead marked the beginning of the end of his family's prominence in Roman society. His citizenship legislation, already controversial, became impossible to advance after the festival. The moderate senators who might have supported compromise measures now distanced themselves from anything associated with his name. His political coalition crumbled as supporters distanced themselves from the scandal and controversy that now surrounded his name. The Italian allies who had placed their hopes in his legislation found themselves abandoned, their dreams of citizenship dashed by the political machinations that had destroyed their champion. The ripple effects of the festival's events spread throughout the peninsula, contributing to the growing sense of betrayal and resentment that would eventually explode into armed conflict. The final blow came months later, when Drusus was assassinated in his own home, struck down by an unknown assailant who was never caught. Many believe that the murder was a direct result of the enmities and accusations that had emerged during the Floralia, that the festival had not only destroyed his political career, but had ultimately cost him his life. The weapon used was a shoemaker's knife, a detail that added insult to the injury by suggesting that even the lowest members of society felt emboldened to strike against him. His death marked the end of one of Rome's most distinguished political families and served as a stark reminder of how quickly fortune could change in the volatile world of Roman politics. The assassination sent shockwaves through Roman society, demonstrating that even the most prominent citizens were not safe from the violence that lurked beneath the surface of civilized life. The story of Marcus Livius Drusus and the festival of 91 BCE became a cautionary tale told in Roman political circles for generations. It demonstrated how the very traditions and religious observances that were meant to strengthen Roman society could, under the right circumstances, become weapons of destruction. The sacred and the political, the public and the private, the orderly and the chaotic, all of these boundaries, which normally provided structure and meaning to Roman life, had collapsed during those fateful days of the Floralia. The lesson was clear to those who paid attention. In the supercharged atmosphere of religious festivals, where normal rules were suspended and emotions ran high, political careers could be destroyed as easily as they were made. The same popular appeal that elevated politicians to power could just as quickly tear them down, especially when skillfully manipulated by those who understood how to exploit the festival's unique psychological dynamics. In the aftermath of Drusus's death, his family's fortunes never recovered. His widow, Servia, was forced to sell the family home and retreat to a modest dwelling outside the city, far from the political center where her husband had once wielded considerable influence. The grand house on the Palatine Hill, which had hosted senators and dignitaries, was sold to pay debts and provide for the family's survival. His children, once destined for prominent political careers, found themselves persona non grata in Roman society, their father's disgrace casting a permanent shadow over their prospects. The eldest son, who might have followed in his father's footsteps as a champion of reform, instead lived a quiet life of obscurity, never achieving the office or influence that his birth should have guaranteed. The family's clients and supporters melted away like snow in spring, seeking new patrons who could offer them protection and advancement without the baggage of association with the Drusus name. The political networks that had taken years to build dissolved overnight, leaving the family isolated and vulnerable in a society where connections meant everything. The broader political consequences of the events were equally severe and long-lasting. The failure of Drusus's citizenship legislation contributed directly to the outbreak of the social war, as Rome's Italian allies, frustrated by their continued exclusion from citizenship, took up arms against the Republic. The war would rage for years, costing thousands of lives and fundamentally altering the character of Roman society. In many ways, the chaotic events of the Floralia in 91 BCE can be seen as the first shots in a conflict that would reshape the ancient world. The festival that was meant to celebrate renewal and fertility instead planted the seeds of destruction that would grow into one of Rome's bloodiest internal conflicts. The irony would not have been lost on Marcus Livius Drusus had he lived to see the consequences of that fateful celebration. From the public spectacles and political machinations of Rome's great festivals, we now turn to examine something far more mysterious and hidden: the secret ceremonies of the Arval Brethren, whose rituals were so sacred and dangerous that they remained concealed from the world for over 8 centuries. This is a story told not through the accounts of ancient historians, but through fragments of stone and bronze, whispered clues left behind by one of Rome's most enigmatic religious societies. Deep within the Vatican museums, tucked away in a storage room that few scholars are permitted to access, lies a collection of marble tablets that represent one of archaeology's most tantalizing mysteries. These fragments, discovered in various locations around Rome over the past 3 centuries, contain inscriptions in an archaic Latin so ancient and cryptic that even today's most accomplished epigraphers can only partially decipher their meaning. They are the surviving records of the Arval Brethren, Rome's most secretive religious society, whose rituals involving sacred nudity, intoxicating substances, and alleged communication with the dead remained hidden for over 1,000 years. The very existence of these tablets was unknown until 1570, when workmen digging foundations for a new villa on the outskirts of Rome accidentally broke through into what appeared to be a buried chamber. Inside, they found not treasure or ordinary artifacts, but these strange stone tablets covered with text that scholars of the time could barely comprehend. The discovery created a sensation among Renaissance antiquarians, who recognized that they had stumbled upon evidence of religious practices that predated Christianity by centuries. The Arval Brethren, or fratres arvals in Latin, were established according to Roman legend by Romulus himself, making them potentially the oldest religious institution in Roman history. The name itself provides clues to their nature. Arval derives from arvum, meaning cultivated field, suggesting that their original purpose was connected to agricultural fertility and the protection of crops. But as we shall see, their actual practices evolved into something far more complex and mysterious. Unlike the grand public festivals that drew thousands of participants, the Arval Brethren conducted their most important ceremonies in absolute secrecy, with membership limited to exactly 12 men drawn from Rome's most elite families. For over 8 centuries, from the founding of Rome until the late imperial period, these 12 individuals gathered annually to perform rituals so sacred and mysterious that the penalty for revealing them to outsiders was death. The secrecy surrounding the Arval Brethren was not merely a matter of religious propriety, it was enforced with deadly seriousness. Roman law recognized their right to execute anyone who violated their sacred trust, and there are documented cases of members who paid with their lives for unauthorized disclosure of ritual secrets. This extreme level of confidentiality suggests that their ceremonies involved more than simple agricultural prayers or traditional Roman religious observances. What makes the Arval Brethren particularly fascinating to modern researchers is not just their secrecy, but the tantalizing glimpses we have of their practices through archaeological evidence and the fragmented inscriptions that survive. The tablets reveal references to rituals involving the consumption of a mysterious substance called sacred wine mixed with the tears of Deidea, a goddess whose identity and nature remain completely unknown to modern scholars. No other Roman religious text mentions Deidea, leading some researchers to speculate that she may have been a deity known only to the Arval Brethren, perhaps even created by them. The inscriptions also mention ceremonies conducted in the manner of the first ancestors, suggesting that the Brethren preserved religious practices that predated even the earliest Roman traditions. Some scholars believe these rituals may have originated among the pre-Roman peoples of central Italy, indigenous practices that were incorporated into Roman religion and then carefully preserved by this secret society long after they had been forgotten by the general population. The archaeological evidence becomes even more intriguing when we examine the physical locations where the Brethren conducted their ceremonies. Their primary sacred site was a grove located about 5 miles outside Rome, in an area that is now part of modern-day suburbia. To the casual observer, the location would have appeared unremarkable, a stand of ancient oak trees surrounding a small temple dedicated to an obscure agricultural deity. But excavations conducted in the 1970s revealed the remains of a circular temple complex with underground chambers, ritual pools, and most mysteriously, a series of rooms that appear to have been designed for sensory deprivation. The walls of these chambers were painted black using a pigment that absorbed virtually all light, and they showed no windows or openings for artificial illumination. The acoustics were carefully engineered to dampen sound, creating an environment of complete darkness and silence. The floors of these chambers were covered with a substance that chemical analysis has identified as a mixture of wine, blood, and an unknown organic compound that may have had psychoactive properties. The substance had been applied in multiple layers over centuries, creating a surface that would have been soft underfoot and likely would have released aromatic vapors when warmed by body heat. The purpose of these chambers remains unclear, but their design suggests they were used for rituals that required participants to be isolated from all external sensory input. The most compelling evidence for the unusual nature of Arval rituals comes from a remarkable discovery made in 1888 during the construction of a railway line near Rome. Workers uncovered what appeared to be a ceremonial chamber containing the preserved remains of 12 men arranged in a perfect circle, each wearing identical bronze masks and holding vessels that contained residues of the same mysterious organic compound found in the ritual chambers. Carbon dating has placed these remains at approximately 150 CE, during the height of the Roman Empire under Emperor Antoninus Pius, providing us with a rare glimpse into the actual practice of these secret ceremonies. The preservation of the remains was extraordinary, likely due to the particular chemical composition of the soil and the substances with which the bodies had been treated. Their positioning suggested that they had died simultaneously, possibly as part of a ritual suicide or through the consumption of poisonous substances. The bronze masks themselves have become objects of intense scholarly fascination and debate. Each mask is unique, crafted with extraordinary skill and attention to detail, but all share certain disturbing characteristics that hint at the psychological nature of the rituals in which they were used. The faces are elongated and distorted, with hollow eye sockets that create an impression of infinite depth, as if the wearer was gazing into another realm entirely. The mouths of the masks are open as if crying out, frozen in expressions of either ecstasy or agony. Scholars remain divided on which emotion they represent. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, with delicate engravings covering every surface, depicting scenes that seem to represent transformation or metamorphosis. Human figures blend into animal forms, earthly landscapes merge with celestial imagery, and recurring motifs suggest themes of death and rebirth. X-ray analysis has revealed that the masks contain hidden chambers within their bronze structure, small cavities that once held various substances including mercury, silver, and what appears to be powdered human bone. The mercury would have created vapor when heated by body temperature, potentially causing hallucinations or other altered states of consciousness. The inclusion of human bones suggests connections to ancestor worship or communication with the dead. Perhaps most intriguingly, several of the surviving inscriptions make reference to rituals conducted during specific astronomical events, particularly during solar eclipses and rare planetary alignments. The Brethren apparently believed that during these cosmic events, the boundaries between the world of the living and the world of the dead became permeable, allowing for direct communication with deceased ancestors and even with the gods themselves. The astronomical calculations required to predict these events with accuracy demonstrates a level of mathematical and observational sophistication that was remarkable for its time. The Brethren maintained detailed records of celestial movements spanning centuries, creating what may have been one of the most accurate calendrical systems in the ancient world. This knowledge was closely guarded, passed down from one generation of initiates to the next through oral tradition and encoded inscriptions. The inscriptions describe ceremonies where participants would consume the sacred mixture, don the bronze masks, and enter into trance states that could last for days. During these prolonged altered states, they claimed to receive visions of Rome's future, communications from deceased emperors and heroes, and instructions from the gods regarding the proper governance of the empire. Some texts suggest that major political decisions were influenced by these prophetic visions. One partially legible inscription, discovered in 1923 during excavations near the Circus Maximus, provides a rare glimpse into the psychological aspects of these rituals. The text, carved in the peculiar archaic Latin used by the Brethren, describes how this sacred madness, induced by the ceremonies, allowed participants to speak with the voices of those who have gone before and to receive the wisdom of the eternal city from those who built it. The inscription goes on to describe the physical sensations experienced during the rituals. The bronze becomes as flesh, the flesh becomes as bronze, and the voice that speaks is not our own but echoes from the halls of the ancestors. This suggests that participants believe the masks literally transform them into vessels for deceased spirits, allowing the dead to speak through the living during the ceremonial trances. The text suggests that the Brethren saw themselves not just as priests, but as living links between Rome's past and future, guardians of secret knowledge that had been passed down through generations of initiates. They believed they were responsible for maintaining the spiritual foundations upon which the empire rested, ensuring that the wisdom of the ancestors continued to guide Roman civilization even as the world changed around them. The decline of the Arval Brethren coincides with the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire, and there is evidence to suggest that their final ceremonies were conducted in direct opposition to the new religion. An inscription dated to 394 CE, just 2 years before Emperor Theodosius I banned all pagan religious practices, contains what appears to be a curse directed against the followers of the crucified God, and a prayer for the restoration of the true religion of the ancestors. This inscription was found in a lead container buried beneath what is now St. Peter's Basilica, suggesting that the Brethren may have deliberately chosen to conduct their final ritual in a location that would later become sacred to their Christian persecutors. The symbolism was likely intentional, a final act of defiance against the new religion that was systematically destroying the old ways. The text of this final inscription is particularly poignant, expressing not just religious opposition but deep grief for the passing of an ancient world. The sacred groves are silent, the voices of the ancestors grow faint, and the new God speaks only of endings while we have always known beginnings. The Brethren saw themselves as guardians of continuity, preservers of traditions that connected the present with an unbroken chain stretching back to Rome's legendary founding. Modern attempts to understand the Arval Brethren have been hampered not only by the fragmentary nature of the evidence, but also by the secretive culture that surrounded them even in ancient times. Unlike other Roman religious practices, which were often described by contemporary historians and writers, the Arval Brethren are mentioned only in passing by ancient authors, and then usually in contexts that suggest their activities were considered too sacred or too dangerous to discuss in detail. When they are mentioned, it is often with a mixture of respect and unease. Pliny the Elder refers to them as keepers of mysteries that predate memory, while Tacitus describes them as men who speak with voices not their own. These cryptic references suggest that even well-informed Romans knew little about the Brethren's actual practices, viewing them as guardians of knowledge so ancient and powerful that it was best left undisturbed. Recent advances in archaeological science have begun to shed new light on some aspects of their practices, though many questions remain unanswered. Chemical analysis of residues found in ritual vessels has identified traces of compounds that are known to have psychoactive properties, including substances derived from certain mushrooms and plants that were not native to Italy, suggesting that the Brethren had access to materials from across the Roman Empire and possibly beyond. The presence of these exotic substances raises intriguing questions about the Brethren's connections to other mystery religions and esoteric traditions throughout the Mediterranean world. Some researchers have suggested links to the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece, the Mithraic cults popular among Roman soldiers, and even more distant traditions from Egypt and the Near East. The Brethren may have served as a conduit for ancient wisdom traditions that flowed into Rome from across the known world. Isotope analysis of human remains found at Arval sites has revealed that at least some of the participants came from distant provinces, indicating that membership in the society was considered so valuable that men would travel hundreds of miles to participate. This suggests that the Brethren's influence extended far beyond Rome itself, possibly coordinating with similar societies throughout the empire to maintain a network of esoteric knowledge and ritual practice. The most recent discovery related to the Arval Brethren came in 2019, when construction workers in Rome accidentally broke through into what appeared to be a previously unknown ritual chamber. The discovery caused considerable excitement among archaeologists, as the chamber appeared to have been deliberately sealed and preserved, possibly representing a time capsule from the society's final period. The chamber contained a complete set of 12 bronze masks, each more elaborate than any previously discovered, along with several stone tablets inscribed with text that appears to be a previously unknown variant of Latin. The tablets are currently being studied by an international team of linguists and archaeologists, using advanced imaging techniques and computer analysis to decode their meaning. Preliminary reports suggest that they may contain the most complete record of Arval ritual practices ever discovered, potentially including detailed descriptions of ceremonies, lists of sacred formulas, and even instructions for preparing the mysterious psychoactive substances used in their rituals. If these initial assessments prove correct, the discovery could revolutionize our understanding of Roman religion and the role of secret societies in ancient civilization. What emerges from all this evidence is a picture of a religious society that was far more complex and sophisticated than anything else in the Roman world. The Arval Brethren appear to have developed ritual practices that combined elements of shamanism, ancestor worship, and mystical experience in ways that were both deeply traditional and startlingly innovative. Their use of psychoactive substances, sensory deprivation, and elaborate ceremonial objects suggests a level of psychological sophistication that rivals anything found in ancient mystery religions. The ultimate mystery of the Arval Brethren, however, may not be what they did or how they did it, but why their practices were considered so dangerous that they had to be kept secret for over 8 centuries. The evidence suggests that their rituals were not merely religious exercises, but were believed to confer real power, the ability to communicate with the dead, to influence the future, and to access knowledge that was forbidden to ordinary mortals. In a society as superstitious as ancient Rome, such claims would have been taken very seriously indeed. The Brethren may have possessed knowledge that could threaten the established order, secrets that had to be guarded not just for religious reasons, but for political survival. Their rituals may have revealed truths about the nature of reality, consciousness, and human potential that were too dangerous for general knowledge. As we conclude our journey through the intoxicating world of Roman religious life, we turn from the hidden mysteries of secret societies to examine the pinnacle of religious achievement in Roman society, the extraordinary life of a Vestal Virgin. Here we find a stark contrast to everything we have witnessed so far, a world where religious duty was rewarded not with suffering and hardship, but with luxury, power, and privilege that few Romans could imagine. The first light of dawn filters through the silk curtains of Claudia Maxima's private chambers in the house of the Vestal Virgins, Rome's most exclusive religious residence. As the Virgo Vestalis Maxima, the chief priestess of Rome's most sacred flame, she awakens not to the harsh realities faced by common festival participants, but to a world of unparalleled luxury and power that few Romans, male or female, could ever hope to experience. Her life represents the pinnacle of female achievement in Roman society, a position that grants her legal, financial, and social privileges that would be extraordinary even for Rome's most powerful men. The morning air in her chamber is perfumed with exotic incenses that burn continuously in small golden braziers placed throughout the room. The scent of frankincense from Arabia mingles with myrrh from Africa and sandalwood from distant India, creating an aromatic atmosphere that speaks of wealth and connections spanning the known world. The temperature is perfectly regulated by a sophisticated hypocaust system that channels warm air through carefully designed passages beneath the floors, maintaining ideal comfort regardless of the season. Claudia's day begins with the gentle ministrations of her personal slaves, not the single domestic servant that might serve a middle-class Roman family, but a retinue of specialized attendants who cater to every aspect of her daily routine. These are not ordinary slaves, but carefully selected individuals, many of them educated Greeks or skilled artisans who consider their service to the Vestal order a privilege rather than a burden. Their positions in the household are hereditary, passed down through generations of families who have served the sacred flame for centuries. Her body slave, a Greek woman named Aspasia, has already prepared a bath infused with oils imported from Egypt and perfumes from Arabia. Aspasia is herself a remarkable figure. Educated in philosophy and literature, she serves not just as a personal attendant, but as a companion and advisor. The relationship between Claudia and her slaves is complex, built on mutual respect and shared dedication to the sacred duties they all serve in their different capacities. The water for the bath, heated in furnaces beneath the residence, maintains the perfect temperature throughout her lengthy morning ablutions. The marble bathing chamber rivals those found in imperial palaces, with walls decorated with frescoes depicting the sacred history of Vesta and her servants. The scenes show legendary priestesses performing their duties, their faces serene and dignified, eternal reminders of the tradition. Claudia continues. As she bathes, other slaves arrange her clothing for the day with the reverence due to sacred vestments. Every garment is a work of art. A pristine white stola made from silk imported from distant China, woven by craftsmen whose techniques are closely guarded secrets. The undergarments are of the finest linen, softer than anything available to ordinary Romans, and the jewelry includes gold from Dacia, pearls from Britain, and gemstones from India, each piece carefully chosen to reflect both her wealth and her sacred status. The House of the Vestal Virgins itself stands as a testament to the extraordinary status of its inhabitants. Located in the heart of the Roman Forum, between the Temple of Vesta and the Palatine Hill, the residence occupies some of the most valuable real estate in the empire. The building's architecture rivals that of imperial palaces, with soaring marble columns quarried from the finest Greek sources, intricate mosaic floors that tell the story of Rome's divine protection, and gardens that feature plants and flowers from across the known world. The central courtyard is a marvel of engineering and aesthetic design, containing pools stocked with exotic fish from the Nile and fountains that run continuously with fresh spring water piped in from the hills outside Rome. This constant flow of clean water represents not just luxury, but a miracle of Roman engineering, a display of technical mastery that few private citizens could afford. The gardens themselves are tended by specialist slaves who understand the care of rare and delicate plants, creating a green oasis in the heart of the bustling city. After her bath, Claudia proceeds to her private dining room for the morning meal, a feast that would shame the banquets of wealthy senators. The dining room overlooks the gardens through large windows of clear glass, itself a luxury item imported at enormous expense from specialized workshops in Gaul. The morning light streams through these windows, illuminating a table set with silver dishes and crystal goblets, each piece crafted by master artisans and worth more than most Romans see in a lifetime. The menu for her morning meal includes delicacies that reflect the global reach of Roman trade. Fresh oysters transported in special containers from the coast of Britain, garum fermented from the finest fish caught off the shores of Spain, honey harvested from the sacred groves of Greece, and fruits preserved using techniques that keep them fresh during long journeys from Africa. Each item represents not just wealth, but the vast network of trade and tribute that flows into Rome from across the empire. Her personal cook, a freedman named Marcus who trained in the imperial kitchens, prepares each dish to perfection, seasoning them with spices that are literally worth their weight in silver. Pepper from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, and saffron from the mountains of Asia Minor transform simple ingredients into culinary masterpieces. Even her morning wine, diluted with water according to Roman custom, but from vineyards that produce exclusively for the imperial table, costs more than most Romans earn in a month. The true extent of Claudia's power becomes apparent as the morning progresses and she begins her official duties. As Virgo Vestalis Maxima, she possesses legal privileges that are unique in Roman society, rights that set her apart from every other woman in the empire and place her on equal footing with the most distinguished male citizens. She can own property in her own name without the guardianship of a male relative, make binding contracts, establish her own will, and conduct business with the full authority of Roman law. Her testimony in court carries the same weight as that of Rome's most distinguished male citizens, and she has the extraordinary power to grant pardons to condemned criminals simply by encountering them on the street. This ancient privilege, dating back to the earliest days of Rome, reflects the belief that the Vestal Virgins serve as direct intermediaries between the mortal and divine realms, their very presence conferring sacred protection. Her first official appointment of the day demonstrates the scope of her influence in the most dramatic terms possible. A delegation of senators awaits her in the residence's formal reception hall, men who command legions and govern provinces, seeking her blessing for a proposed military campaign in Germania. These are among the most powerful individuals in the Roman world, yet they approach her with the deference due to a superior, bowing respectfully as she enters and remaining standing until she grants them permission to sit. The reception hall itself reinforces the message of her status and power. The walls are decorated with frescoes depicting the history of Rome, executed by the empire's finest artists using pigments so expensive that they are normally reserved for imperial commissions. The floor is covered with carpets from Persia, their intricate patterns telling stories of distant lands and exotic peoples. The furniture is crafted from rare woods inlaid with ivory and precious metals, each piece a masterwork of the cabinetmaker's art. Incense burns continuously in golden braziers throughout the hall, filling the air with exotic fragrances that mask any less pleasant odors from the bustling city outside. The scent serves not just as a luxury, but as a symbol of her connection to the divine realm, the smoke carrying prayers and petitions upward to the gods who protect Rome. As the senators present their case for the Germanic campaign, Claudia listens with the attention of someone whose opinion genuinely matters. Her response will be carefully analyzed by politicians, generals, and citizens throughout Rome, and her approval or disapproval can significantly influence public opinion and, consequently, the political fate of the campaign's supporters. The consultation is not merely ceremonial. Her blessing can provide the spiritual legitimacy that military ventures require for popular support. When she speaks, her words carry the authority of Vesta herself, the goddess who protects the Roman hearth and, by extension, the Roman state. Her eventual blessing of the campaign, delivered in formal, archaic Latin that emphasizes the sacred nature of her pronouncement, will be recorded by scribes and distributed throughout the empire, providing divine sanction for the military action. After the senators depart, Claudia turns her attention to her role as the administrator of one of Rome's wealthiest institutions. The House of the Vestal Virgins controls vast estates throughout Italy and the provinces, properties that generate income through agriculture, mining, and manufacturing. These holdings have been accumulated over centuries through donations from wealthy Romans seeking divine favor, bequests from dying citizens hoping to secure their place in the afterlife, and direct grants from grateful emperors. As the chief priestess, she oversees investments, approves expenditures, and makes decisions that affect the livelihoods of thousands of people. Her morning review of financial reports, conducted in a private office that rivals those of Rome's most powerful magistrates, reveals that her order's wealth continues to grow, with new donations from wealthy Romans seeking divine favor and profitable returns from existing investments. The administrative work is conducted with the same attention to detail and luxury that characterizes every aspect of her life. The walls of her office are lined with scrolls and codices containing legal documents, financial records, and correspondence from officials throughout the empire, all written on the finest papyrus and bound in leather covers decorated with gold leaf. A staff of educated slaves and freedmen assists with the paperwork, but all major decisions require her personal approval. The complexity of managing such vast resources would challenge any Roman administrator, but Claudia approaches the task with the education and training that have been provided to her since childhood. Vestal virgins receive the finest education available in the Roman world, studying not just religious ritual but law, philosophy, mathematics, and administration. They are among the best educated individuals in the empire, their intellectual abilities honed by decades of study and practical experience. The contrast between her mourning and the experiences of common Romans becomes even more stark as she prepares for the day's religious ceremonies. While ordinary citizens struggle with basic survival and face the physical hardships of festival participation, Claudia's spiritual duties are conducted in comfort and dignity, surrounded by beauty and attended by devoted servants who ensure that every detail is perfect. Her preparation for the sacred rituals includes another bath, this time in water blessed by junior priestesses using formulas that have been passed down through generations. The ritual cleansing is accompanied by prayers and incantations that prepare both body and spirit for contact with the divine realm. She changes into ceremonial garments that are works of art in themselves, white robes embroidered with gold thread and patterns that tell the story of Vesta's protection of Rome. The most important ceremony of the day takes place in the Temple of Vesta, where Claudia tends the sacred flame that must never be allowed to die. The temple, one of the most ancient and revered structures in Rome, provides a setting that emphasizes the cosmic significance of her role. The The circular building, with its perfect proportions and sacred geometry, represents the eternal nature of Rome's divine protection. The interior is illuminated only by the sacred fire and carefully placed oil lamps, creating an atmosphere of mystery and reverence that transports visitors from the mundane world into the realm of the sacred. The walls are decorated with objects of immense historical value, including gifts from kings, emperors, and foreign dignitaries spanning centuries of Roman history. Each item tells a story of Rome's greatness and the role of the Vestal Virgins in maintaining that greatness. As she performs the ritual tending of the flame, adding specially prepared wood and sacred oils according to formulas known only to the Vestals, Claudia embodies the connection between the Roman state and the divine realm. Her actions are believed to ensure the continued protection and prosperity of the empire, making her not just a religious figure, but a crucial component of Roman political and military success. The responsibility is enormous, but it comes with corresponding rewards in terms of respect, influence, and material comfort. The afternoon brings a different set of duties that further illustrate her unique position in Roman society. In a second reception hall, she receives petitions from citizens seeking her intervention in legal disputes, her blessing for business ventures, and her prayers for personal concerns ranging from illness to infertility. The steady stream of visitors demonstrates the extent to which ordinary Romans view her as a direct intermediary with the gods, someone whose prayers carry special weight in the divine realm. Each petitioner brings gifts, money, jewelry, artwork, or exotic goods that add to the already considerable wealth of her order. The gifts are not mere donations, but investments in divine favor, payments for services that no other institution in Rome can provide. The accumulation of these offerings over the centuries has made the Vestal Order one of the wealthiest organizations in the empire. Her evening meal is an even more elaborate affair than the morning repast, often featuring entertainment by the empire's finest musicians and dancers. The dining room can accommodate dozens of guests, and Claudia frequently hosts banquets for Rome's political and cultural elite. These gatherings serve multiple purposes. They reinforce her social connections, provide opportunities to influence policy discussions, and demonstrate the wealth and power of her position. The guest list for a typical evening might include senators and their wives, successful merchants, distinguished scholars, and visiting dignitaries from the provinces. The conversation ranges from politics and philosophy to literature and art, conducted at a level of sophistication that reflects the education and cultural refinement of the participants. Claudia's contributions to these discussions carry particular weight, as her unique perspective as both a religious authority and a property owner gives her insights that few others possess. As the evening progresses, the entertainment becomes more elaborate, showcasing the cultural achievements of the empire. Professional musicians perform on instruments crafted from precious materials by the finest artisans, their melodies filling the air with sounds of exquisite beauty. Dancers present choreographed performances that tell stories from Roman mythology, their movements graceful and precise, trained to perfection through years of practice. Poets recite original works composed specifically for the occasion, their verses celebrating the glory of Rome and the wisdom of its divine protectors. The wine flows freely throughout the evening, but unlike the harsh, undiluted alcohol consumed at public festivals, these are the finest vintages from carefully selected vineyards, served in vessels of silver and gold that enhance both their flavor and their symbolic significance. The day concludes with Claudia's private preparations for sleep, a ritual that emphasizes the luxury and comfort that surround every aspect of her existence. Her sleeping chamber is a masterpiece of comfort and beauty, equipped with a bed made from rare woods and inlaid with ivory. Its frame carved by master craftsmen, with scenes depicting the peaceful sleep of the blessed. The bed is covered with silk sheets imported from China and pillows stuffed with down from exotic birds, creating a sleeping surface of incomparable softness. The room is heated by hypocausts that maintain a comfortable temperature regardless of the season, and the air is perfumed with incense burned in precious metal braziers placed strategically throughout the chamber. As she prepares for sleep, attended by slaves who massage her feet with imported oils and arrange her hair for the night using combs made from tortoise shell and ivory, Claudia reflects on a day that has reinforced her position as one of the most powerful individuals in the Roman Empire. Her life represents the antithesis of the harsh realities faced by common Romans, demonstrating how religious authority, when combined with institutional wealth and political influence, can create opportunities for luxury and power that transcend the normal limitations of Roman society. The contrast between her experience and that of ordinary festival participants illustrates the vast gulfs that existed within Roman society, showing how the same religious traditions that brought hardship and excess to the masses provided comfort, power, and prestige to those fortunate enough to occupy positions at the apex of the religious hierarchy. In her person, the brutal realities of Roman religious life and its most refined expressions coexisted, representing both the democratic accessibility of the gods and the aristocratic nature of those who claimed to speak for them. As she drifts toward sleep in her luxurious chamber, surrounded by the accumulated wealth of centuries and attended by devoted servants, Claudia Maxima embodies the complex relationship between power and piety that characterized Roman civilization at its height. Conclusion: as our journey through the intoxicating world of Roman religious festivals draws to a close, we find ourselves contemplating the extraordinary contrasts and contradictions that defined spiritual life in ancient Rome. From the brutal endurance tests that ordinary citizens faced during public celebrations to the luxurious comfort of the empire's most powerful priestess, these stories reveal a civilization that embraced both the raw and the refined in its quest for divine connection. The Romans we have encountered tonight, the suffering festival participant, the doomed politician Marcus Livius Drusus, the mysterious Arval Brethren, and the powerful Vestal Virgin, all shared a common belief that the boundary between the mortal and divine worlds was permeable, that through ritual, sacrifice, and sacred observance, human beings could transcend their ordinary limitations and touch something eternal. What emerges from these stories is a picture of a society that demanded everything from its members in service to the gods. Whether through physical endurance, political sacrifice, the guarding of ancient secrets, or the maintenance of sacred duties, Romans understood that divine favor required complete commitment. The wine, the nudity, and the claims of divine communication were not mere excesses but essential components of a religious system that asked its practitioners to abandon their ordinary selves in pursuit of something greater. Yet as we settle into the comfort of our modern world, we might reflect on what has been lost as well as what has been gained in the centuries since Rome fell. Our ancestors, for all their struggles and hardships, possessed a certainty about the sacred that our more skeptical age has largely abandoned. They lived in a world where the divine was immediate and accessible, where the right ritual performed at the right moment could change the course of history. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, imagine the ancient flame that once burned in the Temple of Vesta, tended by generations of devoted priestesses who believed that their vigil protected not just a city, but the very foundations of civilization. That flame was extinguished long ago, but the stories it illuminated continue to flicker in our imagination, reminding us of the heights of devotion and the depths of human experience that characterized one of history's greatest civilizations. Sleep well, and dream of a world where the gods walked among mortals and wine could carry prayers to the heavens.